Let's get this party started. 4 o'clock on a Tuesday. If you're not here, I hope you're out on a pickleball court, but I guess how would you know? Or how would I know where you are? So in any event, welcome. Today we're talking about pickleball myths. You know, all of those things that you hear or see on the courts. And I'm checking my tech here. There we go. Forgot to check that part. But anyway, we're talking about pickleball myths and what you hear and you see on the courts, and yeah, what goes on the courts more than anything, right? I mean, all those crazy things that we hear and that shouldn't be said. By the way, I didn't even think I said this. My name is CJ Johnson, and this is the Better Pickleball channel, and we are dedicated here to helping people over 50 play their best pickleball on the court and live their best life off the pickleball courts. And I don't know about you, but when I started this game, there were a lot of things that I was told that I found out later on didn't hold a lot of water. Maybe they were not quite accurate. But anyway, I am just checking my tech here. If you have any questions, make sure that you put them in the comment section to the side. I will definitely try to get to them during the course of this. But I do have several that, you know, some of you have told me, hey, CJ, these are the ones that we hear the most out on the pickleball courts, and the ones that we would like you to talk about because they have hurt my play or hurt other people's play. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's go ahead and let's jump into this. And before I go in too far, excuse me, before I go in too far, I wanted to just tell you a couple of things that we have, or that I have for you, is down below. I've got some additional resources for you. So if you are watching this if you're watching this recorded, I have time coded the sections to let you know which myth is where if you're interested in some and maybe not so interested in others. I've also given you some resources down there to other videos, things that we've done on the channel, so feel free to go to that later. And then there are some cheat sheets to help you to get past some of these pickleball myths. So make sure that you check out those. That's in the show notes down below, so don't miss those resources. All right, so all that said, let's go ahead and let's jump into this. Let's get started. I think this, to me, I had to start with what I think is probably the most prevalent myth in pickleball, and that's run to the net immediately. Were you told this? I'm curious. If you were, give me a little thumbs up. Or put in the comments below what you were told about getting to the net. Because I hear this one all the time. I am amazed that I actually still hear this one as often as I hear it. Yep, you're right. I think a lot of other people have heard this one too. So let's just tackle this one off, especially now if you've been around pickleball for any length of time, you know that this is not necessarily true. So I want to tell you what the reality is before we talk about some of the strategies behind it. So the myth is run to the net immediately, but here's the reality. And here's where it comes from. I can understand it because the reality is the team that's at the non-volley zone or the kitchen line controls the point. What they've done is they have shortened the distance between them and the opposing team. And in effect, they have given the opposing team less time to react. And pickleball, good pickleball, is all about taking away your opponent's time. That's a major component to playing good pickleball. So I can understand how this run to the net came about. So that's the reality. But let's talk a little bit about the strategy behind it, because the strategy is different. There's two strategies. One is what you do when you're the serving team. The second one is what you do when you're the returning team. So when you're the serving team, or I'm sorry, let's start easy one. When you're the returning team, Yes, hit the ball and run to the net. You have one partner who is already up at the non-volley zone. You're the returner. Do whatever you have to do to get to the net as fast as you can. So in that case, this advice is perfect. Run to the net immediately. If you're not exactly sure how to do that, or if you have problems getting there, maybe you're not real fast anymore, make sure that you check out the resources down below. I have a specific video on some things that you can do to change that return and buy yourself a little bit more time to get to the net. So part of this myth maybe is a little bit true. It's not true for the serving team. When you're the serving team, you have to be a bit more judicious about your movement to the net. And when I first started, probably a lot like many of you who said yes, that's what you heard as well. When I first started, it was like, boom, run no matter what. It doesn't matter if you're the server, if it doesn't matter if you're the returning team. So the serving team needs to allow that ball to bounce the second time, right? The double bounce rule. And you're going to hit 1 of 3 shots to try and get your team to the net. You're either going to hit a drop, you're going to hit a drive, or you're going to hit a lob. You have to base your movement to the net on the quality of that shot. You can't just do it blindly, because if somebody hits a third shot and that third shot is a little bit high, it's up and above the net, that shot is going to come screaming back to your feet, or chances are pretty good that that shot is going to come screaming back to your feet. If somebody hits a drive, you need to be prepared to stop somewhere between the baseline and the non-volley zone, because chances are we're not going to get all the way to the non-volley zone on a drive. We're just not that fast. You have to be prepared to stop and defend as you continue to approach the non-volley zone. If that person chose to hit a lob, you have to determine the quality of the lob. Is it going to go over the team's head who's standing at the non-volley zone, or have you just given them a great big juicy, we call it meatball, a great big juicy meatball that is coming back at you hard? So you really need to judge the quality of that shot. Again, I've got a couple of resources in the show notes below. Go ahead and take a look at them. You can get into those in much more detail. One thing that I can tell you is this. One of my favorite drills is to, when you're practicing, is to call your shot. So if you're hitting third shot drops, after you hit the drop, call and say attackable, not attackable, yes, no, whatever the case may be. You start to train yourself to know whether or not that shot was an attackable shot. So that's the myth. And then the reality is it's different based on whether you're the serving or the returning team. So if you've got a question before we get on to myth number 2, go ahead and put it in the comments over there. I'd be happy to answer those. And if you have any questions regarding myths, or maybe I didn't hit one of your favorite myths as I go through these, please feel free to put it over on the side, because I tried to take the biggest ones, or the ones that I hear the most, and just because they're happening at my club doesn't mean that they're happening at your club. You may be hearing completely different things at your pickleball club. So feel free, go ahead and put that in there. But otherwise, we're going to start to move on to myth number 2. Now, this one I think gets everywhere. Forehand takes the middle. Have you heard that one? Thumbs up. Yes. Forehand takes the middle. Not always true. This is really kind of like myth number 1. There are maybe some instances where forehand does take the middle. particularly rec play. This can be a nice way, if you've never played with somebody before, to start the communication between two partners. In fact, I have a friend, Victor, who one of the things he always says is, I've got the middle, or I've got this side. So it's a great way to start some communication. So I can maybe in that instance understand it, but here is the reality. Generally, forehands are better than backhands. And that's how this really came about, right? So a lot of people think, okay, forehands are better than backhands. Perhaps you were even taught that on the center line, if you cross over like 1 arm's length or a paddle length, that territory always belongs to the forehand. So I can see it in terms of communication. I can see it in terms of generally forehands are better than backhands. But I would tell you this, if I was playing with, let's just say one of the Waters, if you know Anna Lee Waters or Mom Lee Waters, they have unbelievable two-handed backhands. I'm probably going to allow them to take something that's relatively close to the line rather than try and insert my forehand in there, because frankly, their backhand is better than my forehand. So again, I understand where this myth comes from, but because that is the generality. But really what you want to do is you want to cover the court based on the direction of the shot that was just hit. I just published a video on Saturday about how to move with your partner, how to move on the court. And you want to cover the direction, not necessarily the portion of the court. If you're trying to get the majority of the court covered, and a pickleball court is 20 inches from side to side, from sideline to sideline, and if you reach out, with your hands on both sides, holding the paddle out, stretching out your arm, I'm 5 feet 7 inches tall. I've got about 72 inches there. If somebody's my height, we can probably cover maybe 12 to 14 feet of that pickleball court. We're going to be missing somewhere around 6-ish feet. So in order for us to do that effectively, we are better off following the direction of the ball. So if I'm the server, and the third shot comes back to me and I choose to hit that ball down the line, I should move down the line. My partner should move in unison with me. If I hit that ball across the middle of the line, towards the center of the line, we're going to move at an angle towards the center line. If I hit that ball to the sideline, I'm going to move to the sideline with my partner. Make sense? If it doesn't, that's okay. Click on the video down below. I just published a video in greater detail on how to do this when you're on the pickleball courts. Now, I will say this, one of the questions that I had asked after that video was, CJ, I play a lot of rec play and I don't always have the same partner. How do I do this? And that comes up a lot because, we play rec play with partners that maybe don't always play the same type of game that we do. Maybe they aren't at the same level. Perhaps they don't know some of the strategies that we may know. When you're playing rec play, I just encourage people to work on your own movement patterns. Because rec play, are you there to get better and enjoy playing pickleball, or are you there to win every game and every point? Now, if you're there to win every game and every point, you need a slightly different strategy. If you're there to simply get better, to learn a little bit more about the game, there would be certain things that I would practice, and you can definitely practice your movement patterns when you're playing rec play. Hopefully that made sense. If it didn't, make sure that you check out the video that went out last Saturday. And again, I've got some links for you below. Please let me know if you've got some questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep sailing on with some of these pickleball myths. I think that running to the net and the forehand down the middle are often two of the most heard pickleball myths. And then I look at the rest of them that I have for you and I'm going, no, they're all heard. but feel free to ask or make some comments on it. Let's jump on. We're going to go ahead and we are going to jump into the next one. All right. I hear this a lot, and that's in part why this channel started, is you don't need to be fit to play pickleball. I don't know if people consider that a selling point or not, or it's just because they see when people see pickleball, a lot of times they see people our age and older playing pickleball, and so then it becomes an old person's game, and somehow older people aren't fit. Yeah, I don't know where that got started or why that got started, but I think that myth gets a lot of people hurt, because here's the reality. Pickleball is a sport, and it requires movement as well as repetition. And those are two easy ways to get hurt if you aren't fit. In fact, when I first started playing pickleball, I've been a golf professional my entire life. Practiced a lot, hit a ton of golf balls, and obviously repetitive motion, time and time and time again. Had very few injuries, stayed fit, did the things I needed to do for the golf swing. Started playing pickleball, and I got my first case of, guess what? Golfer's elbow. Yes, golfer's elbow. For a couple of reasons that I know now. One is the repetitive movement of pickleball, and I had a little something interesting happening in my mechanics that needed to be corrected. But also, I was already, because of golf, I was already really tight in the forearms. So I needed to do some additional stretching that I hadn't yet associated with pickleball. So the repetitive movement can be very hard on our bodies. In general, the movement can be really hard on our bodies. I remember, you see Laura Fenton-Cavanda on this channel from time to time, and we were out playing and we were talking about injury, right? We were talking about the different injuries and the injuries. She travels the country teaching and playing, and she was talking about some of the different injuries that she's seeing, and quite frankly, the escalation of injuries that she's seen. And she made a comment that was like, let's see, hard courts, people who maybe aren't real fit, gee, what could possibly go wrong? Yeah, what could possibly happen and go wrong? And there are a lot of things that are happening that could go wrong. So if you are struggling with your fitness, I did put a self-assessment down in the resources down below. Take a little assessment, see where you're at. At the very least, commit to stretching, right? Commit to warming up properly and cooling down properly. 5 minutes. In fact, one of the videos down there is called 5 Minutes to Better Pickleball. I also have some videos that we just shot recently that will be coming your way on how to get yourself more fit. Well, it happens just kind of in the course of your day. But there are little things that you can do here and there to become more fit, but stretching is a really great place to start. So your actual strategy is build your fitness up specifically for pickleball. You don't have to be fit for skiing if you're not a skier. You don't have to be fit for golf if you're not a golfer, but there are definitely things that you can do for, in particular, for racket sports. So make sure that you are doing those as well. If you've got any questions, make sure that you put those into the chat. Excuse me. I have had a little tickle in my throat today. I'm going to take a sip. I've had a little tickle in my throat today, but that water tasted good. So if you've got some questions, make sure that you put them in the chat over to the side. Moving on. Let's go. Next one. The serve. Do you know that the serve is the most popular videos? The subject of the serve are the most popular videos on this channel. In fact, they're pretty much the most popular videos on all of the pickleball channels. And I think that's because it's such a simple motion, and that when we struggle with it, it can be really frustrating. And one of those myths is just get the serve in. I'm going to guess you've heard that, right? Yeah, just get it in. Just get the serve in. And here's the reality to that situation. Yes, I think that's probably true in some aspects, because it is the only time that your team can score is while you have the serve. So I think number one is get the serve in. But that's not the real strategical purpose of the serve. The strategical purpose of a serve is to force a weak return. If you, as the serving team, you're at a disadvantage, you are at the back of the court, the returning team has gotten to the non-volley zone. We talked about this in pickleball myth number 1. The team that's at the non-volley zone controls the point. They're at the non-volley zone, you're at the back of the court waiting for that ball to bounce. You're in a better position if your serve could force a weak return, making your third shot easier. So as an example, if you hit your serve deep towards the baseline, typically people have a more challenging time with that return than they would one that's inside of the court. If you make a person move, right? So a lot of people don't have great movement. Some of the people aren't very fit. We talked about a couple of these things already. If you make a person move to get the ball, chances are you will get a weaker return than if you hit it right at them and all they have to do is turn their body slightly to make contact with the ball. Another way to get a weak return is to hit to their weakness. And we talked about this. For most people, it's the backhand is a little bit weaker than the forehand happens to be. Try and position it towards their weaker shot. And really a fourth way, and you don't hear this one talked about quite as often, but I think it's also very important, is if you can hit a serve that has a low bounce to it. Anytime we hit shots that have a lower bounce, in order to get the ball over the net, we have to lift that ball. Because the distance from front to back on the pickleball court is so short, we can't necessarily hit that shot real hard. We have to finesse it to keep that particular shot in. Maybe we need to use some spin. We can do a variety of different things. But my point is, it's a more difficult shot when that serve is low to get the return all the way to the back of the court. And if I get my return to the back of the court and you're the serving team, you're probably going to have a hard shot, a hard third shot. It's more difficult to hit the drop shot from back there. You may have to hit a drive. Some people struggle with that. But just all in all, anything we can do on the serve to force a weak return. That's what we're looking for. So what we want to do, the proper strategy is, the actual strategy is not just get the serve in, do whatever you have to create a weak return, which gives your team an easier third shot. Sorry. One more sip. So that's the serving myth that we sometimes get to. I'm going to keep this moving right along. I got to tell you, you don't have a lot of questions this time. I know last time we were talking about pickleball pet peeves and we had tons and tons and tons of questions. So I'm guessing that you have either heard these or maybe you're a little surprised by these. I'm not really sure which one. Let me know if you've heard these before. Tell me heard these or maybe surprised by these and which one you are surprised by. So put that over in the comments section. And I'm going to jump into, I've got a couple more for you. I'm going to jump into our next pickleball myth, which is always take the ball in the air. Now you hear this one talked about, especially at the non-volley zone. You often hear this talked about lobs. I'm pretty sure that I've said this. always take the ball in the air. There have been, excuse me, I've seen some footage and I've had some conversations lately that have caused me to rethink this just a little bit. Now, let me share, here's the reality, okay? The reality is, the reason people are telling you this is the fact that when you take the ball in the air versus letting it bounce, it takes reaction time from your opponents. We spoke earlier that taking time away from your opponents is one of the premium strategies in pickleball. So I can understand this one, and I can agree with it to an extent, but there are some things recently that have made me question this. And I'll tell you what, one of my dear friends, in fact, she's the woman who introduced me to pickleball, Bev, wrote an article that's on betterpickleball.com, and there is a link to it below. Bev is, I don't think she'd mind me telling you, Bev is in her early 70s, right? So her movement pattern is slightly different than my movement pattern, just based on our age. She wrote about her confidence and her ability to not take the ball out of the air, to let it bounce, because she felt that she was giving herself more time to react by allowing it to bounce, because her reactions weren't as fast any longer. And by allowing the bounce, she was able to execute better shots. So she wrote this article. I watched her play, and I have to tell you, she's doing exactly what works for her. So as I started watching other videos, and I watch a ton of different pickleball videos with all different levels, there were two players in particular that I watched. One was Arina Tereshchenko, and the other one is Lucy Kovalova. Two younger professional pickleball players, fantastic players. And I noticed that, at least my perception, I haven't counted it, I don't have the statistics, just my observation, is I think they let the ball bounce a little bit more than perhaps some of their opponents do. Now, in part, these two women have unbelievable footwork, right? They have fantastic footwork. But I think that bounce allows them to work the point in a different manner. So much like Bev, they're adapting to their strengths. And that's something that I would suggest for you, because, you know, as an example, I mean, we're over 50, right? Chances are you have some type of arthritis somewhere. Maybe you don't have good knees. Maybe you don't have great athletic ability. Perhaps your back is sore. Certainly our reactions are different, right? I mean, as we age, our reactions get different. So there can be an argument made that you don't always have to take the ball out of the air. Can be an argument made. You don't want to give up court position, you don't want to give up timing, and you don't want to give up the advantage you have to your opponents. My suggestion would be play around with it a little bit. See if it is something that works for you. Or maybe does it work for you better on a forehand side than a backhand side, because you have bad knees on one side and maybe not on the other. And you're, I don't know, there could be a ton of different things. But I do think it can work. And that surprised me, because I would tell you this, I thought for myself, I thought I would always say, always take the ball out of the air, but I don't really know anymore. So I would say what you need to do, your actual strategy, instead of always take the ball out of the air, is play to your strengths. Do what works best for you. Now, I'm surprised that there's not a few comments coming across, because I know every time I talk about this subject, I get a lot of people who tell me, well, it's always, CJ, it's always. You have to do this always. And you guys are pretty quiet on this one. So that surprises me just a little bit. I'm going to talk about that in just another second or two. I'm not a big fan of always. In fact, you hear me a lot on the channel say, well, it's kind of like all things pickleball, right? It depends. I really believe that many things are, it depends. So let's jump into the next one. I want to talk about, got two more for you, right? I want to talk about the only third shot is a drop shot. And there are some clubs and there are some schools of thought that are pretty rigid on this, right? If you're not dropping the third shot, you're not playing pickleball correctly. I tend to be a person who's not real black and white, especially having taught golf and skiing all these years and you know, teaching pickleball for the last several years. Physically, we're different. We have different abilities and capabilities. We are generally better off playing to our strengths. So now I can understand why this myth has come about. So here's the reality, is a drop shot makes a player hit soft and up on the ball, and a good drop shot. So and what I would define as a good drop shot is a drop shot that is where the apex of the bounce stays below the net. I'm not saying that people can't attack from below the net. If they're great at topspin, they certainly can, but it makes it much less likely that that ball is going to get attacked is if the apex of the ball is below the net. Okay, so that's the reality of a good drop shot. And they also hit soft on it, right? If you're hitting up on the ball, you have to control the speed. The more speed you put onto that shot, the more likely it is that you're going to pop that ball up, which is what I see a lot of people do, right? They go to hit a dink in response, which is the response to a well-hit drop shot. They add a little bit too much speed to it. The ball pops up and it's an easy put away for their opponents, right? So I can understand where it comes into play. But here's what I think the reality of this is the reality of the strategy is you need to mix it up. You need to use both shots. You need to use drop shots. You need to use drives. If you are exclusively using one or the other, I don't think you're developing the skills that you need to move up in levels in pickleball. Good players use the shot that's appropriate for against the team that they're playing or in the game that they're playing at that particular time. I might go through a whole game where all I'm doing is hitting drop shots because that team has a hard time defending the drop. Conversely, there might be a game where you hit all drives because that team they're both weak blockers. Again, this goes back to it depends, right? It depends. By having a multitude of tools in your toolbox, you're going to put yourself in a position where you have the ability to win more games. You'll be able to find out what their weaknesses are and be able to exploit those weaknesses. So use both drops and drives, but if you really want to win, right? You're playing rec play and you're out there. If you really want to win, play to your strengths. If you're playing in a tournament, play to your strengths. If you're confident in XYZ shot, use XYZ shot. Do the things that you do best. I always say, exploit the things that you do very well. Try to improve the things that you don't do so well, but avoid those if you can. And that's why I think good partnerships can develop, is one partner does things slightly better than the other partner. So, one more for you. I've got one more, and that kind of ties into all this. And that pickleball myth is there's a right way to play pickleball. I will tell you this, anytime there's a black and white, always the right way. There is no other option. I just don't think that there's one way to play pickleball. Now, what I will say is this. I think the right strategy is there is a right way for you to play pickleball, for you to get your best out of it. You need to know your strengths and weaknesses. What are you good at? What are you not so good at? Keep, like I just said, keep doing the things you do well. Work on the things you don't do well. But in a default situation where you need to win a point, or you're really looking to win a game, go to the things that you do very well. That's going to win you more points and more games. So worry less about the right way to play and start doing some self-inventory and finding out what are the things that are, what are the best parts of your quiver, right? What are the arrows that you have to shoot? If you're not sure how to do that, again, hit the resources. I've got some things down below for you. In fact, I've got a pickleball inventory where you go through and you just kind of do your own assessment of your skills. And you know what? I think the best way to do an assessment is to ask someone who plays with you as well to do that same assessment, so you get somebody else's view, because we're not always the best judge of it. And by the way, all those resources are free to you. They're things that I've created that I use out on the courts, that I use with different people, and if they help you, I'm happy to pass them along. So this is what we talked about today, are all those pickleball net, myths, you know, running to the net, the forehand in the middle, your fitness, your serve, taking that ball in the air, our drops, and that right way to play. So hopefully I've covered the major myths and dispelled just a few of them and given you some useful strategies as to here's where they probably came from, and maybe this is a way to take that myth and to incorporate it inside of your game. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Go ahead and feel free to put them out there. I did want to let you know, next, the first Tuesday in April is actually April 7th, and we're going to be talking about tournament play, because I know that a lot of you have told me, many of you are already tournament players, some of you have told me that your goal for 2020 is to play in your first tournaments. And wow, tournaments are just growing by leaps and bounds, aren't they? So next live, we're going to talk about what you need to know when you're playing in a tournament, which is pretty timely. I know that a lot of you are headed to the US Open. So hopefully you're there. You are very welcome, Jane. If you've got any questions, you can always, we're coming to the end of our time. Please feel free to reach out to me at cj@betterpickleball.com. You never know when that question or suggestion for a video will pop up in one of the next lives or the weekly videos, which are Saturdays at 2:45. So since I don't see any more questions coming up, I think that we'll take this time and say goodnight. You know how I always end it. Together, we can train smart, live bold, and age well. You have a wonderful evening, everyone.